In term 4 of Year 11, I spend a fair bit of time talking through concepts with students. As part of that process, I sat down with Peter in the art room and I asked her, did she have any ideas for her art making for Year 12?
Well, she was just worried that it was coming up to a Year 12, and the artwork, and she was under a bit of stress there.
He was a great help. Every time I got stuck on something, we'd both work on ideas of how to make it better, and pretty much just pushed me to get it all done.
That and Mr. Borden, was a great help and inspiration for her with it.
And, she then said to me, well, I wouldn't mind telling my mother's story. So at that point I said to her, okay, well why don't you go home and get your mother to tell her to write her life account out, a story, and bring it in and we'll have a look at it.
I said, well, Leo, just wrote my story down for her.
And she brought it in the next day, and as soon as I saw what she'd written, I really felt that she had a very solid basis for an artwork.
I was 3 years old when I was taken from my parents. It was in 1965. We were living in a tin shack on the banks of the Murrumbidgee River. One day the welfare came along and told my mum and dad that our living conditions were no good. We only had mattresses on the dirt floor and just the basic foods. But back then there was no assistance from the government. So anyway, they took me and my 2 brothers. They said we were suffering from malnutrition and that they were taking us to the hospital. But the lying mongrels, the only place they took us was to court the next day. Can you imagine the pain and anguish that my mum and dad felt when they went to the hospital to get us, only to find that we weren't there and that we were on our way to Sydney? My brother Morris and myself were put into an orphanage at Strathfield. I never saw my dad again and only saw my mum once before she died.
The official presentation of the artwork to the National Museum of Australia will now commence with Mr. Gordon, Ms. Peter Edwards and Dr. Michael Pickering.
If a country is going to get its future right, it has to get its history right. And what I want to do is just speak a little bit about what this artwork will add to the stories of Australian history, the telling of Australian history.
My family and I were visiting Canberra a couple of years ago, and we went to the National Museum of Australia and we looked at the First Australian section. I really thought that Peter's work would readily find a place as part of that collection, so I emailed the curators of the museum.
This is much more enjoyable for me than sort of any mega international conference because it's honest, it's unmediated, and it gets directly to the audiences that museums are supposed to be appealing to.
So that's only a little bit of my story, and so what I haven't had a chance to let people know is that that's affected Peter and Kate's background as well, and like I've got 3 beautiful grandkids now, and so they've lost their culture, and so they're still carrying on down the line because they're still part of that stolen generation.